The dinner table was quiet that night. Too quiet. The clinking of cutlery echoed in the silence, like small hammers striking glass. My mother's lasagna, always baked to perfection, sat untouched on my plate. I could tell something was off the moment I walked in. Dad's smile was forced, Mom's eyes red from what looked like crying, and their usual chatter about neighborhood gossip was nowhere to be heard. Then, as I reached for my glass of water, Mom said in a trembling voice, "Ethan, there's something we need to tell you." She glanced at Dad, who gave a slow nod. The air in the room shifted. Dense, electric, suffocating. I waited, my fork frozen midair. "You're adopted." For a second, I thought I misheard her. I let out a nervous laugh, waiting for the punchline, but there was no laughter from them, only the ticking of the old clock on the wall. My father looked down at his hands, refusing to meet my eyes. My stomach sank. "What are you talking about?" I asked quietly. Mom's voice broke. "We never wanted to hide it from you forever, but we thought it would be easier this way. We wanted you to have a normal life." Normal. The word echoed in my head, meaningless now. The rest of the night was a blur. I remember staring at them, my parents, no, the people who raised me, as they explained how they found me through an adoption agency 28 years ago, how they fell in love with a tiny baby who wasn't supposed to be theirs. But I didn't hear much after that. Everything felt staged, like I was watching a play I didn't sign up for. I excused myself, went upstairs, and sat in the dark, staring at my reflection. Who was I? The next morning, the sun felt too bright, almost mocking. I hadn't slept. My mind spun between grief, confusion, and betrayal. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mom. "Can we talk? It's important." I almost didn't reply, but curiosity, or maybe guilt, got the better of me. When I arrived at their house, they were sitting together again at the same table from last night, only this time the atmosphere was different, calculated. Mom smiled nervously. "Ethan, we know this is a lot to take in, but your father and I are going through a bit of financial trouble right now." I stared at her. "You're kidding, right?" Dad cleared his throat, avoiding my eyes. "The mortgage, the car, some medical bills. It's been tough. We didn't want to ask, but we thought maybe—" "You thought maybe I'd help you out," I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. Mom nodded, her face softening. "We're still your parents, Ethan. We've always been there for you." The words cut deep. Still your parents. My heart twisted in confusion. Just 12 hours ago, my entire identity had been shattered, and now they wanted money. I wanted to scream, to ask them why they chose that moment to drop such a life-altering truth, only to follow it up with a financial request. But part of me couldn't. I loved them, or at least the version of them I thought I knew. I asked quietly, "Did you tell me the truth because you needed money?" Her eyes widened in shock, or guilt. "Of course not. Ethan, we just thought you deserved to know." But her voice trembled, and I knew she was lying. I left their house without another word. For the next few days, I couldn't focus on anything. Work emails piled up, calls went unanswered. I kept thinking about my birth parents, where they were, what they were like, and why they gave me up. But the thought that haunted me most was whether my entire childhood had been built on a transaction. A week later, I received another message from Mom. "Ethan, please, we're desperate. The bank is threatening to take the house." I stared at the text for a long time. Part of me wanted to help. After all, these were the people who raised me, who gave me love, care, and a home. But the timing, the manipulation, I couldn't ignore it. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, scrolling through old photo albums. Me as a kid on my dad's shoulders, mom baking cookies with me, family vacations by the lake. I could see love in those moments, but now it all felt tainted by hidden motives. Then, as I flipped one page, I noticed something odd. A picture from my first birthday. In it, there was a woman I didn't recognize. She was young, maybe early 20s, with long dark hair and striking green eyes. She stood behind me, smiling tenderly. Mom had never mentioned her. My pulse quickened. I turned the photo over, and there, in faded ink, was a note. For my little boy always, -L. My hands trembled. L. Could she be my birth mother? Why was this photo hidden among my parents' things? And why did they never tell me about her? Suddenly, everything clicked. The rushed confession, the strange timing, the plea for money, they weren't just desperate. They were hiding something bigger. And I had just found the first clue. I couldn't stop staring at the photo. The woman's face seemed oddly familiar, not in a memory, but in a feeling. Her eyes, a shade of green I'd never seen on either of my parents, looked straight through me. There was tenderness there, but also sadness, as if she already knew she'd lose me. My chest tightened, and before I realized it, tears blurred my vision. I wiped them away and stared at the back of the photograph again. For my little boy always, -L. The handwriting was elegant but shaky, almost as if she'd been crying when she wrote it. Why would mom and dad, no, I corrected myself, the people who raised me, keep this photo hidden all these years? Why would they let me believe my birth parents were just nameless strangers when they clearly knew more? My heart raced as I pulled out the rest of the album, flipping through each page, each photo, searching for any other clue. But there was nothing. Just the same smiling faces, birthdays, holidays, and family dinners that now felt staged. Everything looked the same, but everything was different. I took the photo and placed it on my desk under the lamplight. The signature at the bottom, L, felt like a riddle waiting to be solved. Maybe L was short for Laura, Lily, or Lauren. I didn't know. But I was certain of one thing. I needed answers, and I wasn't getting them from the people who'd lied to me my entire life. The next morning, I called my mother. She picked up immediately, her tone thick with hope. "Ethan, thank God! I thought you were never going to talk to us again." "I found a photo," I said coldly. "A woman with me on my first birthday. There's a message on the back, signed L. Who is she?" Silence. Then a long sigh. "Ethan, where did you find that?" "I hid it in my baby album," I said, my voice rising. "You kept it from me all these years. Why? Who is she?" Mom's tone turned defensive. "It doesn't matter who she is. What matters is that we raised you, we loved you, and we've been there your whole life." "That's not an answer." She hesitated, and for the first time, I heard something new in her voice. Fear. "You don't understand, Ethan. She's not someone you want to find." I felt my pulse thudding in my ears. "So you do know her?" "Ethan, please just drop this. It's better for you if you don't dig any deeper." And with that, she hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling an icy wave crawl up my spine. Her reaction wasn't just protective, it was panicked. What could possibly be so bad about knowing where I came from? That night, I searched online adoption records for my birth year, my supposed date of adoption, anything. It wasn't easy. The agency my parents mentioned, Heaven Hearts Adoption Services, had closed nearly 15 years ago. But after hours of digging through old newspaper archives and forums, I found something that made my blood run cold. A short article dated the same year I was adopted. The headline read, "Local woman claims her newborn was taken without consent." The woman's name was Lydia Carrington. My breath caught. Lydia. L. The article said she had accused a private adoption agency of coercing her into giving up her child. She claimed she'd been promised visitation rights, but was later told the baby was placed out of state and she'd never see him again. The case had been dismissed due to lack of evidence. There was no photo, but I knew it was her. It had to be. My hand shook as I typed Lydia Carrington into social media, hoping for anything, a clue, a trace, a face. But there was nothing current. Only an old obituary from 2 years ago. My stomach dropped as I read the words. Lydia Ann Carrington, beloved daughter and teacher, passed away peacefully at 52. She is survived by her sister, Marlene Carter, of Brooksville. Brooksville? That was only 2 hours away. The next morning, I drove there. The small town was quiet, lined with antique shops and cafes that smelled of cinnamon and old wood. I found Marlene's address easily. It was a modest yellow house with overgrown roses climbing the fence. When she opened the door, I was struck by her resemblance to the woman in the photo. Same green eyes, same dark hair streaked with silver. "Yes?" she asked, cautious but kind. "Are you Marlene Carter?" "I am. Can I help you?" I hesitated, pulling out the photograph. "I think this woman, Lydia, is my mother." Her eyes widened and the color drained from her face. She reached out, her hands trembling as she took the photo. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, in a broken whisper, she said, "My God, you have her eyes." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. Marlene invited me in, her voice shaking as she asked me to sit. The house smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. Family pictures lined the mantel. Lydia smiling, Lydia holding a baby girl, Lydia standing beside Marlene. "She never stopped looking for you," she said softly. "Not for a single day." I swallowed hard. She was looking for me? She hired private investigators, wrote letters, went to court, but the agency, those people, they covered everything up. She said they told her baby was gone, that it had been adopted by a family out of state, and the records were sealed forever. I felt my chest tighten, the weight of it almost unbearable. Did she ever find out who adopted me? Marlene shook her head. No, but she always believed it was arranged privately. She thought someone had paid extra to make sure the adoption couldn't be traced. I froze. Paid extra? Marlene looked at me carefully, as if afraid of her own words. Your parents, the ones who raised you, they weren't rich, were they? I nodded slowly. No, middle class. Dad worked in finance, Mom was a teacher. She gave a long, trembling sigh. Lydia always said the people who took you weren't strangers to the agency director. She suspected there was money involved, under the table. My heart sank, and for the first time, the pieces fit together in the ugliest way possible. That desperate confession over dinner, the sudden plea for money, my mom's panic when I mentioned the photo. They hadn't just kept my origins a secret. They might have bought me. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as the realization began to sink in. Bought. The word echoed in my mind, burning like acid. I could hear the faint ticking of a clock somewhere in Marlene's house, a cruel reminder that time had moved on for everyone except me. I was trapped in the past, piecing together a life that had been built on a lie. Marlene sat across from me, twisting a napkin between her fingers, her eyes glistening. I don't know the full story, Ethan, she said quietly, but Lydia never stopped talking about you. Every year on your birthday, she lit a candle. She said she felt you were still out there somewhere. She died still believing she'd find you one day. I couldn't speak. My throat closed up. The woman in the photo, the one who looked at me like she was my entire world, had lived her whole life searching for me while I sat at another family's dinner table believing in a story that wasn't mine. After a long silence, I managed to whisper, "Do you have anything of hers? Letters, photos, anything?" Marlene nodded slowly and stood up. She walked into another room, her footsteps soft against the wooden floor, and returned with a worn shoebox. She placed it in front of me as if it contained something sacred. "These were hers," she said. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. I opened the box carefully. Inside were faded photographs, yellowed letters, and a few newspaper clippings. My hands trembled as I picked up one of the letters, dated 27 years ago. The ink was smudged, but I could still make out the words. "To my son, wherever you are, I pray you're loved, safe, and happy. They told me I couldn't keep you, but I never agreed to let you go. Someday, when the truth comes out, I hope you'll forgive me for not fighting harder. Love always, Mom." My vision blurred. I could barely breathe. Every line felt like a blade slicing through the image I'd held of my childhood. My home, my parents, our laughter. None of it was real anymore. Or maybe it had been real to me, but not to them. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to steady myself. She didn't give me up," I said in disbelief. "She was forced to." Marlene nodded, her voice trembling. She was young, scared, and alone. The agency told her she wasn't stable enough, that the baby would have a better life elsewhere. She didn't have money or lawyers to fight them. They took advantage of her. I stared at the box again, feeling the weight of 28 years pressing down on me. Did she ever find out who arranged it? No, but she always suspected it was someone connected to the agency director. There were rumors he handled special adoptions for families willing to pay more. My pulse quickened. My father had always avoided talking about money, yet he managed to buy a new house the same year I was adopted. I remember overhearing arguments between him and Mom about old debts when I was younger. I thought they were talking about loans. Now I'm not so sure. I looked at Marlene. "Do you still have any contact information for that agency's staff? Maybe old records?" She hesitated, then opened a small drawer and pulled out a business card so worn the edges had begun to curl. "Daniel Hartman, Director, Heaven Hearts Adoption Services." A number was printed below it, and though the agency had long since closed, maybe someone still knew him. "Be careful," she said quietly. "Lydia said he was a man who liked secrets." On the drive back home, I couldn't shake her words. The rain had started, tapping against the windshield in a slow, relentless rhythm. My mind raced with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answers to. What if my parents hadn't just lied, but committed a crime? What if their plea for money wasn't desperation, but fear that the truth might finally catch up to them? When I got home, I went straight to the box of old family documents. Birth certificates, adoption papers, medical forms, all the official proof of my existence. I found the adoption certificate folded neatly in a plastic sleeve. My parents' names were listed, along with the date of finalization. But what caught my eye wasn't their names, it was the signature at the bottom. Daniel Hartman. I felt my stomach twist. The same man. I searched online again, but this time for him. There wasn't much, just a few outdated business listings, a charity event photo from the late 1990s, and then an obituary. Daniel Hartman, passed away in 2018, survived by his son, Thomas Hartman, now CEO of Hartman Group, a private consulting firm. A lead. I stared at the screen, my heartbeat quickening. If his son had taken over the family business, maybe he knew something about the agency's old files, or the people his father had dealt with. That night, I drafted an email to Thomas Hartman, posing as a journalist researching a story on closed adoption agencies. I didn't mention my name or connection. I just asked if he had any access to old Haven Hearts records for verification. He replied within hours. "Mr. Reynolds, I do have access to some of my father's archives. What kind of information are you looking for exactly?" My hands hovered over the keyboard. I typed carefully, asking for information about adoptions finalized in the summer of 1997. I said I was investigating potential irregularities. He responded the next morning. There were several cases during that time, Some are sealed, but one name comes up more than once. Carrington. My father kept meticulous notes on that case. If you'd like to discuss further, we can arrange a meeting. Carrington. Lydia. I felt a chill run through me. He knew something. I agreed to meet him 2 days later at a coffee shop downtown. When I arrived, Thomas Hartman was already there, a man in his mid-40s with the same cold, calculating expression I'd seen in his father's old photographs. He shook my hand firmly, studying me with a curious look. "So, you're interested in my father's records. May I ask why?" I kept my tone even, just following up on a case that never sat right with me. He leaned back in his chair. "The Carrington file. Yes, I remember that name. It was unusual." "How so?" He smiled faintly. "Let's just say it wasn't a standard adoption. There was pressure from someone higher up. My father handled it personally. He said it was urgent and that the clients wanted absolute discretion." My chest tightened. Who were the clients? He gave me a knowing look. "Their names won't surprise you, Mr. Reynolds." He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a thin manila folder, and slid it across the table toward me. I opened it slowly, my hands trembling. Inside was a single page, an invoice with a signature I recognized instantly. My father's. I felt my throat tighten as I stared at that signature, my father's name written in his neat, confident script, the same one that had signed my school permission slips, my birthday cards, the notes he left on the kitchen counter when he went to work. Seeing it here on an invoice marked with the words "Private Adoption Arrangement, Confidential Transaction" made my stomach turn. The amount listed beside it was large. Too large. It wasn't just an adoption fee. It was a purchase. Thomas watched me closely, his expression unreadable. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said softly. I couldn't answer. My eyes stayed fixed on the document, on the cruel finality of the ink that tied my very existence to a monetary value. "So this is it," I murmured. "Proof." Thomas leaned forward, lowering his voice. My father kept meticulous records. He believed in covering his tracks, but he also liked insurance, just in case any of his clients ever tried to betray him. That's why I still have these files. I looked up at him, my voice barely steady. How many were there? How many people like me? He sighed. "More than you'd like to know." The 1990s were full of special adoptions, as he called them. Some babies were legally surrendered. Others weren't. The Carrington case was particularly messy. The mother refused to sign the final paperwork, but the documents were forged anyway. A chill ran through me. "Forged?" He nodded. "Yes. My father arranged a notary to falsify the consent signature. I believe your adoptive parents were aware of that. They might not have known the full extent of it, but they knew enough to keep quiet." I felt the room closing in. My heart pounded in my ears as fragments of memories flooded back. The hushed arguments between Mom and Dad when they thought I was asleep. The tension around adoption anniversaries. The way Mom always avoided questions about my birth. "They must have known," I whispered. "All this time, they knew." Thomas's eyes softened for a moment, though his tone remained clinical. "I can't tell you what they felt, but I can tell you what they did. They paid, they signed, and they kept the truth buried." I couldn't breathe. The edges of my vision blurred as I pushed the folder back toward him. "I need a copy of that." He hesitated. "That's not something I usually—" "Please," I cut in, my voice cracking. I just need it. After a long pause, he nodded. I'll send a scan to your email. But be careful, Ethan. Digging into the past can ruin more than it heals. I left the coffee shop with my chest tight and my mind spinning. Everything I'd ever believed about my life had been rewritten in a single morning. When I got home, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall. My father had always taught me about integrity, about honesty, about doing the right thing. And now the man who preached those words had bought me like I was property. The next day, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I drove to their house again. My father was in the living room reading the paper, while my mother was arranging flowers in a vase. For a brief moment, I almost turned around. But then I saw their faces, the calm normalcy, and something inside me snapped. I placed the printing invoice on the table in front of them. Recognize this? Dad looked up confused, at first, then his eyes froze on the paper. Mom's hands stilled, the flowers slipping from her grip. Where did you get that? Dad asked, his voice low. It doesn't matter. You paid for me. You bought me. Didn't you? The silence that followed was unbearable. My mother's lips trembled, her eyes filling with tears. Ethan, please. Don't, I snapped. Don't you dare cry right now. You have had 30 years to tell me the truth. Story compression. Dad stood slowly, folding the newspaper with deliberate calm, though his jaw was tight. You don't understand, Ethan. We did what we had to. We couldn't have children. We tried for years. When the opportunity came, to steal me from my real mother, I interrupted. To take me from someone who loved me? That's what you had to do? Mom stepped closer, her voice breaking. We loved you, Ethan. We gave you everything. You were ours in every way that mattered. Except the way that does matter, I said. My voice shook, but I didn't back down. You knew she didn't give me up willingly. You knew that agency was corrupt. Dad's face darkened. You think you can judge us after all we've done for you? We saved you from a life of poverty. That woman couldn't even support herself. I stared at him, my heart twisting. You don't get to justify what you did by belittling her. She spent her life trying to find me. She died thinking she failed. Mom broke down, covering her face with her hands. Dad didn't move. He just looked at me. That same cold calculation I'd seen in Thomas's eyes. And now what? He said. You want revenge? You want to destroy us? I just want the truth, I said quietly. For once in my life, I want something real. I turned to leave, but my father's voice stopped me. You walk out that door, and you're no longer our son. I froze. The weight of his words settled on my shoulders like lead. Then I looked back, meeting his eyes. I never really was I? And I walked out. Outside, the air was cold and sharp, but it felt cleaner than the suffocating lies I'd been living under. I sat in my car, shaking, unable to start the engine. My phone buzzed. A new email. It was from Thomas Hartman. As promised, the document is attached. Also, you should know, there were other payments made from your father's account to my father over the next decade. Regular ones. I thought you might want to see. My hands went numb as I opened the attachments. There they were. Yearly payments, always under vague descriptions, like consultation or service renewal. They hadn't just bought me. They'd been paying to keep the secret alive. The rain started again as I sat there staring at those files glowing on my laptop screen. Each line felt like another nail sealing a coffin. My past, my identity, everything I thought I knew about my family. Year after year, the payments continued, each one carefully labeled, always the same amount. The last one had been sent just 3 months before my parents' dinner confession. It wasn't guilt that made them tell me the truth. It was fear. They knew something was coming. Maybe someone had threatened to expose them, or maybe the man who'd kept their secret for decades was gone and they didn't know how long the silence would last. I leaned back in my seat, closing my eyes as the realization hit me. All those stories they'd told me about sacrifice and love, all those times they said, "We gave up everything for you." It wasn't a metaphor. They'd been paying for their crime in installments. I didn't even notice how long I sat there until the car windows fogged up. My hands were trembling. Not from anger this time, but from something deeper, a hollow kind of sorrow that comes when you realize the people you loved most are strangers. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept reading the emails over and over, dissecting every word, every timestamp, every payment. One document, dated just before the first payment, had a short note attached. Insured documentation remains sealed. Future correspondence to be handled through private channel, DH. DH. Daniel Hartman. My father must have been paying him hush money, ensuring my adoption record stayed hidden. But why keep paying after Hartman died? Why not stop when the man holding the secret was gone? Unless someone else had taken over. The next morning, I sent Thomas another email. "You said the payments continued. Do you know who received them after your father's death?" His reply came within minutes. "Yes, they were redirected to a shell company under my firm's umbrella. I wasn't aware of the arrangement until I took over the books. When I saw the pattern, I contacted your parents about discontinuing the payments. They insisted on keeping them active, said it was for peace of mind." Peace of mind. That phrase made my skin crawl. I asked for the account details, and when Thomas sent them, I froze. The money wasn't going to him. It was routed to a name I didn't recognize. Marlene Carter. Lydia's sister. My heart skipped. That couldn't be right. She didn't seem like the type to extort anyone. She'd looked genuinely shocked when I told her who I was. Could she have known all along? Was everything she told me a performance? I grabbed my keys and drove, the wipers smearing the rain across the windshield as I sped towards Brooksville. By the time I reached her house, dusk was falling and the air smelled of wet earth and pine. The porch light was on. When she opened the door, her expression flickered. Surprise first, then something like guilt. "Ethan," she said, forcing a smile. "I wasn't expecting you." "I bet," I said, stepping inside before she could invite me. "You've been expecting my parents, though, haven't you?" Her face paled. "What are you talking about?" "Payments," I said coldly. "Every year, from my father's account, straight to you." For a long moment, she didn't speak. The ticking of a clock in the hallway filled the silence. Then she closed the door softly and leaned against it, her voice barely above a whisper. "You weren't supposed to find out." "Then tell me why. Why the hell were they paying you? What did you do?" She sighed, walking past me into the living room. "It wasn't blackmail. It started as guilt money. Your parents reached out to Lydia years after the adoption. They wanted her to stay quiet, wanted her to stop trying to find you. My sister refused. But after the court dismissed her case, she was broken. They sent her money to help her rebuild. She never cashed a single check." "Then why did the payments continue after she died?" I asked. "Because I needed them," she said simply. "When Lydia passed, I found out your parents had been making those transfers all along. I could have stopped them, but I didn't. I told myself it was justice in a way. After what they took from her, it felt right that they kept paying for it." I shook my head slowly. "So you knew everything."
"I knew what they did," she admitted. "But I didn't know you were you. Not until you showed up here." Her words rang with sincerity, but I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. Everyone I'd trusted in the last few weeks had betrayed me in some way. "Why didn't you tell me when I came here?" I asked. Tears welled in her eyes. "Because seeing you was like seeing her again. I didn't want you to hate her memory for what happened. And I didn't want you to hate me for taking their money." I turned away, pacing across the room. You should have told me. I deserved the truth. She nodded, her voice breaking. You're right. But tell me something, Ethan. What will you do with it? What good will it bring you now? I didn't answer. I didn't know. When I left her house, the rain had stopped, but the sky was still heavy with clouds. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the small yellow light flickering from her window. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. In some twisted way, she was the only one who hadn't lied to protect herself. She'd lied to protect the memory of someone who'd loved me more than anyone else ever had. Back home, I opened my laptop again, scrolling through the payment history one last time. There it was, 30 payments in total, the last one sent 3 months ago. I hovered over the file, then slowly deleted it. It didn't erase the truth, but it was the first thing I'd done for myself in weeks. The following morning, I got a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was shaky. Ethan, please, your father isn't well. He's been drinking again. He keeps saying you're going to ruin everything. Please, just come talk to us. I replayed it twice, staring at the wall. Part of me wanted to drive back there, to confront him again, to demand why he'd done it. But another part of me, the quieter, heavier part, knew there was nothing left to say. I was never theirs to begin with, and now that I knew the truth, there was no going back. Still, something about her voice stuck with me. Fear, desperation, the same kind I'd heard the night they told me I was adopted. There was something she wasn't saying, something I hadn't uncovered yet, and I had a feeling it wasn't about guilt anymore. It was about what or who else might be coming for them. The voicemail kept replaying in my head long after I deleted it. Her tone wasn't just desperate, it was frightened. Not the kind of fear that comes from guilt, but from something closing in, something real. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that there was another layer hidden beneath the lies. My father's drinking, his sudden panic, their decision to confess after decades of silence, it all pointed to something more immediate than regret. Someone else must have known. Someone was pushing them. The next day, I decided to drive back to their house one last time. It was early evening when I pulled up, the lights in the windows glowing faintly through the rain. For a moment, I just sat there, watching. The curtains shifted slightly in the living room, and I saw my mother's outline, small, nervous, pacing. When I knocked, she opened the door almost instantly, her eyes red and swollen. "Ethan," she breathed, gripping the edge of the door like she'd been waiting all day. She stepped aside and I walked in. The house felt different. Cold, quiet, and tense. My father was slumped in his armchair, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the table beside him. His face looked drawn, his eyes sunken. He didn't look up when I entered. "What's going on?" I asked. Mom closed the door and leaned against it, wringing her hands. "Someone's been calling," she whispered. "Threatening us." I frowned. "Who?" She shook her head. "I don't know. A man. He says he knows what we did, that he has proof. He wants money." I stared at her, stunned. "Money? How much?" 50,000, she said, her voice cracking. "He said if we don't pay, he'll go to the police. Or worse, he'll go to you." My stomach twisted. "You think this has something to do with the adoption?" Dad finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Of course it does. What else could it be? Those records, those payments, someone must have found them. Did you call the police?" He let out a bitter laugh. "And tell them what? That we bought a child? That we've been making illegal payments for decades? No, son. That's not how this works." The word son hit differently now.
like a weapon instead of affection. I ignored it. What exactly did he say? Mom handed me a crumpled piece of paper. It was a note, written in block letters. You've paid enough to keep this quiet, but silence isn't free forever. 50,000 by Friday, or your secret dies with your freedom. No signature. Just an address, an abandoned warehouse near the docks. I exhaled slowly, trying to study the pounding in my chest. This doesn't make sense. If he really had proof, why not go straight to the police? Dad looked up at me then, his eyes red-shot. Because he doesn't want justice, Ethan. He wants money. He's a parasite feeding off the rot he smells. Mom was trembling. What are we going to do? I stared at the note again. The handwriting was neat, precise, not like something scrawled in panic, but calculated. I thought of Thomas Hartman, of how he said his father liked keeping insurance, leverage. Maybe this was one of his insurance policies that survived him. Did you ever meet anyone else from the agency after Hartman died? Mom shook her head. No one. We thought it was over. Dad muttered, apparently it never is. For a while, no one spoke. The only sound was the steady ticking of the grandfather clock, each second dragging heavier than the last. Finally, I said, I'll go. Mom's eyes widened. Ethan, no, you're not getting involved in this. I already am, I said quietly. It's about me, isn't it? If someone's trying to blackmail you, it's because of me. Maybe they'll talk to me. Dad scoffed. You think this is some movie? You can't just walk in there and... I'm not asking for permission, I cut him off. I just want this to end. I left before either of them could stop me. By the time I reached the docks, the sky had turned an angry gray. The warehouse sat at the edge of the water, a hollow shell of rusted metal and cracked windows. The air smelled of salt and decay. I parked a few yards away, heart hammering in my chest. Inside, it was dark and empty, except for a single hanging light flickering above an old desk. On the desk was an envelope. My name was written across it in the same block letters. I hesitated, then tore it open. Inside was a photograph of my parents sitting at the dinner table, taken from outside the window. Another photo of me leaving their house the day I found the adoption certificate, and a third one of me at the coffee shop with Thomas Hartman. Whoever this was, they'd been watching. There was also a note. The past doesn't stay buried, Ethan. If you want to protect what's left of them, you'll bring me what I ask for. I turned the paper over. No signature again, but this time there was a small mark in the corner. A logo. A stylized H. Hartman. A cold realization washed over me. Thomas wasn't helping me. He'd been setting me up. The files, the emails, the meeting, it was all bait. He must have known I'd confront my parents, that they'd panic, that the secret would unravel on its own. I stuffed the note back into the envelope and stormed out into the rain, dialing his number. He didn't answer. I called again. Still nothing. Then a message appeared on my screen. Careful, Ethan. You're walking into something bigger than you think. No name attached. But I knew who it was from. I sat there in my car, the rain hammering on the windshield, adrenaline flooding my veins. If Thomas was blackmailing my parents, what did he really want? Money or something else? The records, maybe, or the leverage of exposing the whole operation his father had built. Then it hit me. Those files he'd shown me weren't just about me. He'd said there were others, other children, other special adoptions. Maybe he wanted my parents' silence not because of what they did to me, but because they were the key to unlocking something far worse. And if that was true, then Lydia's story wasn't the only one stolen. I started the car, gripping the wheel tightly. I wasn't running anymore. If Thomas Hartman wanted to play games with the truth, he was about to find out just how much I'd learned from the people who built their lives on lies. The difference was, I wasn't afraid of the truth anymore.
And there, on the final page, was my name. Ethan Cole. Born, unknown. Transferred, confidential. Status, observation, success. My vision blurred for a moment. The word observation clawed at my chest. What does this mean? I demanded, looking up. Mom was crying silently now. We didn't know at first, she whispered. He told us it was just an adoption, but after a few years, letters came, updates. They wanted to know how you were developing, how you learned, how you reacted under stress. I told him to stop. I told him we didn't want to be part of it anymore. I stared at her in disbelief. You reported on me? Like I was some experiment? Dad's voice cracked. We didn't understand what it was. By the time we did, it was too late. They said if we stopped cooperating, they'd take you back. We just wanted to keep you safe. Safe. The word felt poisonous. I backed away, clutching the ledger like it might burn me. And now he wants this? To finish whatever his father started? Mom reached out. Ethan, please, listen to me. If he gets that book, he'll destroy everything, every family, every child. I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening again. Then I'll make sure he doesn't. Dad's voice cracked. What are you going to do? I looked at them both, two strangers who had once been my parents, and said quietly, what you never could. Tell the truth. Before they could respond, I turned and walked out into the rain again, the ledger pressed to my chest. The storm had grown worse, the wind howling through the trees like something alive. I didn't know where I was heading, but I knew I couldn't stop now. If I wanted answers, I'd have to dig into the rot myself and face whatever waited in the dark beneath my own name. The wind whipped against my face as I walked down the empty street, my coat plastered to my body, the rain biting cold through the fabric. The ledger felt impossibly heavy in my hands, like it carried not just names, but the weight of every secret buried under Hartman's empire. Each drop of rain that hit it seemed to echo like a heartbeat. I didn't drive. I needed to think. The night was too loud, my head too full. Every page of that book had burned into my memory. The children's names, the coded annotations, the small, precise handwriting. And there it was again, next to mine. Observation, success. Success at what? Raising a child into a lie? Turning a life into data? By the time I reached my apartment, my fingers were numb. I tossed the soaked ledger on the kitchen table and switched on the light. The room felt claustrophobic, like the walls were holding their breath. I sat down, opened the book again, and started reading from the beginning. The first entries were clean, professional. Dates, case numbers, payments. But as I moved forward, the tone changed. There were side notes in the margins, short, cryptic comments like adjusted temperament, unfit for continuation, and placement terminated. The further I read, the darker it got. Halfway through, I found something that made my blood run cold. Subject E12 displays high emotional resilience despite environmental instability. Predicted outcome, leadership or rebellion. Observation ongoing through proxy parents. E12. The handwriting was identical to the note beside my name at the end. It wasn't just me. There were others, E01 through E15, 15 subjects, children placed, observed, tracked, and according to the ledger, only 4 of us were marked success. My throat tightened as I scanned for any hint of who the others might be. Next to some of the names, there were vague identifiers, locations, years, brief summaries. One stood out, E09. Relocated to Seattle. Terminated 2011. Unconfirmed. Terminated? My stomach twisted. What if these weren't just notes? What if they were reports of what happened to the other children? A knock on the door made me jolt upright. I froze. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. A woman stood outside, drenched, her hair clinging to her face. I almost didn't recognize her until she lifted her head. Lydia. I yanked open the door. What the hell are you doing here? She stepped inside without asking, shivering. They followed me, she whispered. Someone's been watching my apartment since last night. I didn't know where else to go. My pulse quickened. Who's following you? She shook her head. I don't know, but they want this. Her eyes flicked to the ledger on the table. How do you know about that? She hesitated. Because I was one of them too, Ethan. The room tilted. What? I found out 3 years ago, she said quietly. My parents, my adoptive parents, got letters too. I thought it was just a mistake until I traced one of the signatures. It led back to Hartman's agency. When I started asking questions, my father's name appeared on a list of participants. He wasn't even supposed to adopt. He was a researcher. She looked up, her eyes hollow. We're part of the same study. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words pangled in my throat. That means all of us were selected, tested, observed. The Hartmans called it the continuity program. It was supposed to prove that genetics could be engineered for specific outcomes: intelligence, empathy, leadership, obedience. I felt sick, like breeding animals. Exactly, she rubbed her arms, and now Thomas wants to finish what his father started. The files you have, they're the missing link. Without them, he can't prove the results. But with them, he can rebuild the project. I ran a hand through my hair, pacing. You said they were watching you. Who's they? I think Thomas hired them, but he's not the only one looking for the files. There's another group, the ones who funded his father in the first place. Old money, private investors. They want to erase every trace of this before it leaks. Her voice trembled. They killed E09, Ethan. I found his name in a sealed autopsy report. They called it an accident, but it wasn't. The rain battered harder against the windows, thunder growling in the distance. I felt the edges of panic pressing against my ribs, but underneath it was something sharper. Clarity. If we ran, they'd keep chasing us. If we hid, they'd find someone else. But if we exposed this, truly exposed it, they'd lose everything. I looked at Lydia. We can't destroy it. Not yet. We make it public. All of it. She shook her head quickly. You don't understand. They control the narrative. The moment this goes out, they'll brand us as liars, as ungrateful or delusional. We need proof. Something undeniable.
My gaze drifted to the ledger again. Then we find the source, Hartman's original archives. If Thomas has them, he's sitting on more than names. He has evidence. Lydia hesitated, then nodded. I might know where. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. It was a map, an old blueprint of a storage facility on the outskirts of town. This place belonged to Hartman's company. I tracked the registration before it was dissolved. There's a sealed sub-basement listed as medical storage. No one ever went public about what was inside. I studied it, my pulse racing. You think the data's still there? If Thomas didn't move it yet, yes. The plan formed in my head almost instinctively. We'd go at night. Get in, find the records, copy whatever we could, and get out before anyone noticed. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that easy. Thomas was always 2 steps ahead, like he'd already written the ending to this story before I'd even started reading it. Still, I couldn't stop now, not when I finally knew what I was fighting against. I met Lydia's gaze. We go tonight. She nodded. Then we need to move fast. I grabbed the ledger, slid it into a waterproof case, and shoved it into my backpack. As we stepped back into the storm, the world felt charged, electric, like the air before a lightning strike. Every step toward that facility was a step closer to the truth I'd spent my whole life being protected from. But as I drove into the night, one thought kept looping through my head, quiet but relentless. If Thomas was right, and my life had been an experiment, then who was I, really, when the experiment was over? The drive to the facility was silent, except for the rhythmic hum of the tires against wet asphalt. The rain had eased to a mist, but the clouds hung low and heavy, pressing down on the night like a lid. Lydia sat beside me, her hands clenched in her lap, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Every few seconds she glanced in the mirror, watching for headlights that didn't belong. When the GPS announced the turnoff, we veered onto a narrow service road cutting through dense woods. The trees leaned close, branches scraping the car like fingernails. I slowed down as the silhouette of the old storage facility emerged from the fog, a massive concrete structure, half swallowed by vines and rest, surrounded by a fence with sagging barbed wire. "This is it," Lydia murmured. We parked behind a collapsed loading dock, hidden from the main gate. The air smelled of damp earth and iron. I grabbed a flashlight and slipped the backpack over my shoulder. The ledger inside felt like a heartbeat against my spine. We climbed through a gap in the fence and approached a side door. The lock had long since rusted through, and with one hard push, it gave way. Inside, the air was cold, still, and stale. Dust floated in the flashlight beam like tiny ghosts. Rows of empty shelves stretched into darkness, and the floor was littered with broken glass and old paperwork melted by time. Lydia checked the map. The sub-basement should be down that corridor. We moved quietly, our footsteps echoing. The deeper we went, the colder it got. The walls were lined with faded company logos. Hartman Biosolutions. I ran my fingers over the lettering, flakes of paint coming off like dead skin. When we reached the end of the corridor, we found a metal door sealed with a chain and a corroded padlock. I took a deep breath and swung the flashlight toward a nearby workbench. There was a crowbar buried under dust and cobwebs. I pried the padlock open with a few hard blows until it snapped. The door creaked open, releasing a rush of air that smelled faintly of antiseptic and something metallic, blood, or the memory of it. Concrete steps led down into the sub-basement. The walls grew slick with moisture as we descended. A low hum filled the air, faint but steady, like distant machinery still running after all these years. When we reached the bottom, my flashlight flickered over rows of metal cabinets and sealed crates. The space looked untouched, frozen in time. A workstation sat in the center, covered in yellowed files and an old terminal connected to a bulky power source. Lydia exhaled shakily. "It's all still here." I approached one of the cabinets and pulled it open. Inside were binders labeled by year: 1989, 1990, 1991. Each folder was thick with records, photographs, birth certificates, handwritten notes. There were pictures of babies, toddlers, families smiling for staged portraits, all tagged with ID numbers. I flipped open one of the binders and froze. There was my face, a photo of me as an infant, labeled E-12, observation subject. Next to it, clinical notes in a doctor's handwriting. Notable genetic markers present. Behavioral progress exceeds projection, recommended for long-term study. I felt sick, my entire life reduced to a file. Behind me, Lydia was going through another cabinet. "Lydia, look what I found." She held up a manila folder marked Continuity, Final Phase. Inside were letters between the Hartman Foundation and several research donors. The language was cold and mechanical, like they were discussing machinery instead of human lives. Phase 3 trials to begin upon subjects reaching maturity. Data collection through social reintegration and psychological stress tests. Social reintegration, I whispered. That's what this is. They put us in families, tracked how we lived, how we broke. Lydia nodded grimly. And they've been waiting for us to reach the final phase, whatever that means. I sat down at the old workstation. The computer was ancient, its casing yellowed with age, but when I pressed the power button, it hummed weakly to life. Lines of green text appeared on the black screen. Access code required. I typed Hartman on instinct. Denied. I tried continuity. Denied. Lydia leaned over. Try E12. I hesitated, then entered it. The system paused, then clicked open. Dozens of file names filled the screen. Subject E001 through E15. Status reports. My fingers trembled as I opened mine. It was all there. Videos, data logs, detailed psychological summaries. They'd been monitoring me for years after the adoption, through my parents' updates, through school, through therapy sessions. I didn't even remember being recorded. Lydia whispered, "Oh my God." Then something else caught my eye. An audio file, timestamped just 2 weeks ago. I double-clicked it. "They're coming for us," I finished. A noise echoed above. Metal groaning, faint footsteps. We both froze. "Someone's here," Lydia whispered. I killed the monitor, plunging the room back into near darkness. The footsteps grew louder, descending the stairwell, slow, deliberate. A flashlight beam sliced through the dark, sweeping across the cabinets. I grabbed Lydia's arm and pulled her behind a stack of crates. The beam moved closer, accompanied by the sound of soft breathing. Then a voice, calm, smooth, unmistakable. "Ethan," Thomas called. I knew you couldn't resist. My pulse thundered in my ears. He took a few more steps, his light settling on the workstation. "You've done well, really. Most would have stopped at the first lie, but not you. You kept digging." I clenched my fists. Lydia's grip tightened around my wrist. Thomas sighed softly. "This could have gone differently, you know. You were supposed to be the proof that it worked, that nurture could elevate nature. But here you are, proving the opposite." He stopped directly in front of our hiding spot. The light hovered inches away from our faces. "Step out, Ethan, or she dies first." Lydia's breath hitched. I rose slowly, hands raised. My heart pounded so violently I thought it might crack my ribs. Thomas smiled faintly, lowering his weapon just enough to seem civilized. "There you are. Always the moral one." He tilted his head. "Now be a good son and hand me the ledger." I didn't move. The rain outside had started again, echoing through the cracked ceiling above us. The only thing louder was the sound of my own heartbeat and the weight of every truth pressing against the thin line between fear and fury. For a long moment, none of us moved. The hum of the dying lights above and the faint drip of rain through the cracks were the only sounds filling the vast concrete room. Thomas stood there, calm, centered, confident, as if he had orchestrated every step that brought me here. His gun was steady, his eyes glinting with something colder than anger. "Give me the ledger, Ethan. It doesn't belong to you. It never did." My grip on the backpack tightened. Lydia shifted slightly behind me, her breath shallow, terrified, but ready. I could feel her trembling. "You've been lying from the beginning," I said, my voice raw. "All those times you pretended to help me, you were just leading me here." Thomas's expression barely changed. "Help is a relative concept. I gave you truth. You wanted to know who you were? Now you do." I took a slow step forward. "No, Thomas, you gave me data, files, lies dressed as answers. Truth doesn't come from control. It comes from what people do with it." He chuckled under his breath. "You sound just like my father when he lost control of the experiment." The word experiment sent a chill through me. I remembered the reports, the recordings, the way they wrote about us like we were lab rats with birthdays. "We're not your father's work," I said quietly. "We're the consequences he never wanted to face." His smile vanished. For the first time I saw a flicker of emotion. Resentment, maybe. Even fear. "You have no idea what's at stake. That ledger, those files, they're not just history, Ethan. They're power. They can ruin people who still shape the world you live in. If you release them, everything collapses. Do you really think chaos will bring justice? Maybe not. But it'll bring the truth, and that's a start. He raised the gun higher, eyes narrowing. You wouldn't dare! Lydia's voice broke the tension like glass shattering. He doesn't have to, she said, stepping out from behind the crates. Your server wasn't as secure as you thought. I uploaded the files the moment Ethan powered that terminal. Every video, every report, it's already on multiple drives, mirrored and waiting. Even if you kill us, it's over. For a split second, Thomas's face froze, disbelief flickering into fury. Then he lunged forward, grabbing her by the arm, the gun pressing against her temple. I reacted without thinking. The backpack hit the floor and I slammed into him with everything I had. The gun went off, an explosion of sound that tore through the silence. The shot echoed, deafening, ricocheting off the concrete walls. We crashed to the ground, the gun skidding across the floor. Lydia scrambled for it, kicking it away just as Thomas swung a fist, catching me across the jaw. Pain burst through my head, but adrenaline kept me moving. I grabbed the ledger case and swung it hard, connecting with his shoulder. He grunted, staggering back. You think you're some kind of hero? You're just another product of what we built. Maybe, I said through clenched teeth. But at least I know who I am now. He charged again, and we collided, knocking over a stack of crates. Metal clattered everywhere. Lydia shouted my name, her voice distant through the ringing in my ears. I grabbed the nearest object, a rusted pipe, and swung. It connected. Thomas fell to his knees, dazed, blood trickling down his temple. For a moment, everything stopped. The room fell silent, except for the low hum of the terminal still running in the corner. I stood there, breathing hard, staring down at the man who'd tried to own the story of my life. Lydia crouched beside him, checking for his pulse. He's alive, she said. I nodded, my hand shaking. Let him face what he created. We gathered the ledger and backed away. As we reached the stairs, the terminal's faint glow flickered once more. On the screen, a message appeared. Short, simple, chilling. Transfer complete. The data was out. Everywhere. By the time we emerged into the Ren, the horizon was beginning to pale with dawn. The facility loomed behind us like the carcass of something that had finally died. Lydia leaned against the car, shaking, her face streaked with mud and tears. It's done, she whispered. Not yet, I said, looking back. People like him don't vanish overnight, but at least the world will know what they did. She glanced at me. What about you? What are you going to do now? I looked at the sky, the first hints of sunlight pushing through the clouds. I spent my whole life being defined by other people's secrets. Maybe it's time I start writing my own story. She smiled faintly, exhaustion softening her features. Then let's make sure no one writes it for us again. We drove in silence for a while. The radio crackled, faintly, breaking in and out. Then a news alert came through, a developing story about leaked government research, hidden adoption records, and corporate funding traced to the Hartman Foundation. My name wasn't mentioned, but I knew it would be soon enough. Lydia turned the volume down. You sure you're ready for this? I nodded slowly. I was born in someone else's lie. If the truth burns it all down, then let it burn. We didn't speak again. The road stretched ahead, wet, endless, waiting. I didn't know what would come next. The investigations, the lawsuits, the chaos. Maybe even danger. But for the first time, it didn't scare me. The experiment tried to measure what people could become when shaped by control and fear. They never understood that truth doesn't break under pressure, it evolves. When we reached the city limits, I pulled over. The rain had stopped, and the world smelled of iron and new beginnings. Lydia handed me the ledger. You should be the one to keep it, she said softly. I opened it one last time. The pages were fragile, the ink fading, but the name still burned bright in my mind. I tore the last page, the one with my name, free, folded it, and tucked it into my pocket. Then I closed the book and placed it on the ground. Lydia watched as I struck the lighter. Flames caught, licking the edges of the paper, then roaring higher. The fire reflected in her eyes as the ledger turned to ash. Some things, I realized, didn't need to survive to tell their story. The smoke rose into the morning air, carrying decades of silence with it. And for the first time in my life, I felt weightless, untethered, unobserved, free. As we drove away, the sun finally broke through the clouds, turning the wet road into a ribbon of gold. The world behind us burned quietly, but ahead, just ahead, was a horizon wide enough for the truth to finally breathe.